All right, so this is our medicinal herbs class. We are going to cover a number of herbs that are one medicinal in nature by the virtue of the fact that historically they've been used for various conditions over perhaps millennia. Okay, the Ebers Papyrus and the earliest use of herbs goes back to at least 1500 BC in what we call the first medical writing. So the Ebers Papyrus, which is found in northern Africa, also known as Egypt, in the physician's tomb, or um, uh, is is where some of this information is being drawn from. Okay, so the use of herbs goes back a long time, and it predates medicine, and many of our medical models and medicines for pharmaceutical drugs, they were initially herbs. The first pharmacopoeia was all herbs, and this is some of what they studied. This is some of what they learned and what they applied, and so we'll be learning and applying this as well. So I'm going to start with, let's see, with this screen. Let's see. You should see. Give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see.
Okay, good. Okay. So first, okay, shepherd's purse, also known as the internal bleeding healer, gives you an idea of what um, this is for. Um, Found all over the United States, botanical name Capsella bursa pastoris. It's important to know the botanical name. Why? Because shepherd's purse can be called any number of things across the country or internationally. So, but the botanical or the Latin name will always be the same. We can use all parts of the herb, collecting it from April to September. And so internal hemorrhages, childbirth, bloody urine, bleeding from the lungs, stomach, profuse menstruation, nose bleeds, wounds, cuts, and earaches. So it's kind of an overall um, of benefit for bleeding, and that can be internal or external. But a difference, just something just kind of outside the lines there a little bit is are the earache. Okay. Now we can apply that. We've talked, we'll discuss more and more about the various forms that herbs can be used. So to be clear, an infusion is the same as a tea. Herbalists will say infusion, other people will say um, tea. And then um, the next is as an ointment. So, for example, uh, for external um, application, we can use shepherd's purse as an ointment. An ointment, a salve, a cream, they are similar, slightly different in terms of how they're made, but just think about that for external use or being a cream or something that is different than an infusion. One of the aspects or things that we know about an infusion, if you're making a tea, you're drinking that. If you're making a decoction, for example, and that's made from the roots and the bark and stems of the herb, then you're drinking that. But your ointment, salves, and creams are made differently, and so they have to be prepared or combined with substances that will allow them to stay in contact with the body in order to produce the healing effect. So just imagine if you had a pain with your arm or something going on with your arm, and there was an herb that was supposed to help the pain, and you just took some tea. And of course, this would be beyond, you'd be able to tolerate on your body, but if you just pour that onto your arm or your leg or your knee. Not too much is going to happen, right? It's going to run off. But if you have the herb in in a preparation that goes on the ointment that holds it on there, that slowly releases it, that keeps it in place, then you can get some healing benefit. If somebody had psoriasis or skin condition or something, just pouring a tea or a decoction over it, pouring the liquid over there, it's not going to stay. It's not going to last long enough to do any benefit. And a poultice is when you take, for example, a dry substance like the herb. It could be some dried or powdered, or it can even be the herb that is typically reduced um, to a size small enough that when you add heat, when you add hot water, and or some other substances, that too can be applied to the body. Okay, so the infusion is liquid. The ointment and poultice um, is uh, is more, well, it stays in contact, comes in contact with the body, stays in contact with the body. And then the emergency field use is like if somebody was out in nature and they needed to grab something or know what's available, um, if they knew something about the herbs, they could use it absent a hospital, a clinic, having the comforts that we normally would have at home in a home setting, in in a or an urban setting. Okay. In fact, my first introduction to herbs was with the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and yes, I went to the Boy Scout. We had camps, and there we learned some things from the Boy Scout manual. And out in nature, you have to learn things like how to build a fire, how to identify a burn, first degree, second degree, third degree burn or a break, a simple fracture, compound fracture, how to use your neckerchief in order to uh, um, create a tourniquet, a bandage, or a sling for the arm. So that's something that people who are into survival typically learn. It's like knowing difference between something that's food and something that's not food. Knowing the difference between an herb that has benefits and poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, something else that if you ate it, if you tasted it, if you even touch it, you're in trouble. Okay. So the medicinal properties of the shepherd's purse, it's a hemostatic. And there'll be a number of these terms that'll follow here. I'll put it out there in the front, because people always ask about this. Like, that's an unfamiliar term. All terms that are new, all medicinal property terms, all will be in a glossary for you to look at. Now, some people, if you know a little bit about etymology or how how words are derived in, or their root, or the prefix and the suffix, for example, of uh of a word, then hemo, or anything that says heme, relates to the blood, and then static, to slow down. So it slows down bleeding. That's what a hemostatic is. Or mild astringent, that's drawing or diuretic. It removes water. Anti-hemorrhagic, it stops hemorrhages or bleeding. And then mild stimulant. And to the right is a picture of the of shepherd's purse. Okay, the herb itself. Next, we have comfrey. Okay. So next we have comfrey. Comfrey is also known as the bone mender. Helpful for again, there's a picture to the right of this. Symphytum officinale, found all over the United States. All parts are used, collected same months as the shepherd's purse, April through September. Beneficial for diarrhea, helpful for diarrhea or dysentery, another digestive problem. Coughs, bleeding lungs, again, internal pains and bruises, leukorrhea, or white vaginal discharge, broken or crushed bones. So it's got quite a reputation for healing, quite a reputation for helping the bones. And historically, people have broken bones. People have worked outside, worked in nature, fallen down, twisted an ankle, and all types of things. And where they've needed that, that's where this has been important and lauded over a long period of time, probably centuries at least. Now, we can use comfrey as an infusion or decoction. Now, when they say all parts of the plant are used, a decoction, and just can make mental note if you can't make a physical note of this, and this is being recorded, so you'll have access to it. But a decoction is different than an infusion in that in an infusion, we're using the softer part of the plant. For example, we're using the flower, the leaves in an infusion, right? The softer part of the plant. We're preparing a decoction or a tea just under boiling. So we are boiling the water and then taking it off the heat and then pouring it onto the herb, or we are putting the herb in a pot or container, bringing it up to boil, and then once it starts boiling, turn it off and then let it steep. Either way, we're allowing it to steep, and that's again just under boiling. So if you see that on a quiz or something, you'll know the answer, right? A decoction, how is a decoction different? It's different because of the parts of the plants that's used. So if we're using the root of the plant, that is much harder than the top, which would be the flowering part, right? You know that flower petals are soft. You can, they may break up in your hand, and they have a lot of moisture. Roots, you typically cannot just rub them in your hands and cause it to break down, right? So the root, the stem, the bark, the harder part of the plant is what you make a decoction from. Now, in that case, you do boil it. Okay. So for example, you take the root, you'll clean the root off, and then you may even chop it up or break it down. But you do boil that because it's only through that high intense heat and for a certain period of time that will draw the medicine from that. If you were just to sit that in tepid water, warm water, or under boiling, you're not going to get much medicine from that. So we want to extract the medicine from the hardiest part of the herb when we prepare a decoction. A poultice, again, it can be dried herbs, it can be, or sometimes it's the leaves that you're going to heat up some water and put it onto the herb. And it may be, so the leaves may act as like some broad leaves may act as the poultice that you wrap around the affected area, and or you might put something else around it to hold it in place. That is so that you can sustain the contact of that herb onto the affected area. Okay, so infusion, teas, internal. Decoction is internal. Your poultices, your ointments, salves, creams are external. There are times that you use herbs internally. There are times that you use it externally. There are times that you may use both. Okay. Now, the fluid extract, it introduces the fluid extract there. And what does that mean? That means that when you take an herb, there's another way that you can extract, because all of these are extracting processes, right? All of these are processes that are drawing the medicine, drawing the medicinal benefit out of the plant so that we can get into the person, okay, or the animal, or but but in this case, we're talking about the medicinal applications for human use. Now, and then so you've got a couple of different types of extracts, and we'll go through the extract processes in more detail as we go, as we progress. But the fluid extracts are normally when you take an extracting solution, like we call it a menstruum, and we add the herb to that. So, for example, we've probably all seen a cigarette get dropped into a cup. And if it gets dropped into a cup of water and someone smoked it down to whatever, so that there's still some tobacco in that cigarette. You drop it in water, some of that tar and nicotine is going to go into the water. If you drop it into liquor, then you're going to get the same results, but the alcohol is going to extract even more. So if you were to compare the cigarette butt going into water and the cigarette butt going into alcohol, much less a what they call 80 proof or 90 proof or 100 proof alcohol, then you'd find that comparatively, the alcohol is going to draw more tar and nicotine out of that cigarette butt. And anybody's been to a club or whatever, backyard party or something, has seen that, when people do, they're smoking, they drop it into a cup. And if there's some liquid in there, you kind of see the evidence of it. It goes from, if it was water, it goes to brown. If it was alcohol, if it was brown liquor, it gets browner. If it was white alcohol, it gets even more brown. So that is the extraction process. And what is the purpose of that? That extraction process, putting it into solution that typically goes into bottles like, let's see, I'll use this as an example, even though they typically have a dropper on the top. In a liquid extract, a fluid extract, will normally, I'm going to say, it will always be in my experience, it would always be in a brown bottle, a blue bottle. I think brown is the most common, blue and green. Why do we do that? One, it concentrates. Two, it preserves it. Okay. Three, the color of the bottle does not allow light to come in that otherwise would decrease or diminish the potency of the herb, right? Because if you set anything in the sun, whether you set clothes in the sun, whatever you set, if you set anything in the sun, that sun is going to lighten it. The sun is going to draw things out. It doesn't have to. It doesn't. It's not coming in direct contact like with your hand or something, but that sun is changing it, and the condition. So usually they'll say, or have instructions on there say, keep this in a cool, dry place, right? Because if it's cool, it's not overheated. So heat will impact the potency, the efficacy, the chemical properties of an herb. Moisture will affect that. So if you got a dried herb, you would not put that in a moist environment. So if you were storing herbs, you may store it in a cabinet or someplace that's in an area that's going to be, it doesn't have to be climate controlled per se, but it's not just going to be left out in the open. It's not going to be in a damp basement. If your basement was damp, if it was moist, if much less it was, it had an affinity for molds or something like that. If you'd need a humidifier in it, you can, if you can smell the air, guess what? You would not want to put it in those kind of conditions, because that is going to impact the herbs in a dried state are what you call hygroscopic. Okay, they draw moisture. Okay, so if it's dried, if you take an herb and you collect it and then you dry it, okay, you're drying it to preserve it. One. Secondly, you're collecting it in such a way, and then you're drying it in such a way so that it does not get mold or mildew. Because there's some kinds of mold and mildew and things like that. It's like the herb will be anything but medicinal because it's moldy, it's broken down. And in some foods, you have to watch for that as well. Okay. And then that's for preservation. So the extract processes are for preservation, protection, and to maintain its properties. Okay. And then okay, I do see a note here. Is it better to work with dried herbs? Good question, to which I will give you a good answer. How about that? Okay. Better to work with dried herbs. It really depends on the application. Okay. So for those people who would say, no, extracts are the best. Extracts, you get more in it and blah, 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 blah. Okay, they have a reason for that. But it's like, what is the application? So if you're going to, there are times when you can use fresh herbs. It's like there are times that you use fresh foods. There are times that you'll use you might use and there are times that or even like fresh beans or certain substances. And then there are times that you dry it for, that's a preservation method. You're drying out the beans and then you keep them for a longer period of time. And then you prepare, and then you rehydrate them and then prepare them when they're ready. So, what form you take them in, how much you take, how often you take it is going to be determined by one, the condition, the specific, condition or application. So there's not a right or wrong there. Okay. Hope that's clear. Okay. And let's talk about the concentration of it. So if you have a tea, and let's say you had tea bag, and I'm probably bring one out in a little bit, but let's say you have a tea bag. You have the dried herb, and then you're adding water to it. Now, what probably freshman biology will tell us that is you're diluting it, and you understand dilution. When you add water to something, if you add water to juice, it makes it weaker. It doesn't make it stronger. Okay. If you add water to pretty much anything, it's the dilution makes it lighter. Now, sometimes that's a good thing because sometimes you just want something that's mild. Okay. So for example, if a person has a certain condition or chronic condition, they would tend to take more teacups, or in some of these references, it'll say wine glassfuls or whatever. So they may take more of the liquid more often to get the same amount. Because one thing in the tea bag, and this is can get a little technical, a little in the weeds here, for lack of a better term, no pun intended, but the if you're adding water to the herb, it's more diluted. You would typically have to use more in order to get an effect with that. And then with a decoction, and a decoction could be similar, but you may have more concentration of the herb that you're starting out with. It could be strong. It's neither one of them is standardized though. And that's one of the arguments that people in science have, is that you don't know from herb to herb, from plant to plant, from source to source. you don't know exactly how much of the beneficial or active ingredient is in a tea or tea bag. You don't know how long that tea bag has been around if you use a tea bag. Okay. Now, you know, if you harvested it and then you dried it yourself, you know, and then you put it in a container, an airtight container, um, uh, and you label it. You can label it and know if you had it for a month, 3 months, 6 months, or whatever. But if you and if you and but if you get it from a company, you don't know when they harvested, when they dried it out, what kind of conditions it was when they harvested it or dried it out, or how long it's been on the shelf. And an herb, a plant will tend to lose its potency over time. Extracts in alcohol, not as much, but they do tend to lose potency over time. So again, depending on the condition. Is it a mild condition? Is it a chronic condition? And then in terms of, again, application or dosing, the fluid extract, you know, so you're taking drops. So instead of taking cups, wine glassfuls, you know, you may still take it 2, 3, 4 times a day, but you're taking drops as opposed to cups. And for some people, that's more easily tolerated. They may not like the taste, but they might be able to tolerate that more, and that might be more beneficial and just easier to administer. All right. Got a little deep on that one. Okay, so the medicinal use and preparation methods on comfrey. So for diarrhea, dysentery, coughs, for really pretty much the same conditions across the board, you see 3 different distinctions here. How you'd prepare, how you would administer it if it was in infusion form, a decoction, or a fluid extract. Okay, so you got different colors there for the different methods. Okay. Yeah, and as you'll see in here, as I was instructing, yeah, preparing the leaves and stem in a standard infusion, steep it 20 minutes. So it's about 10, 20 minutes typically that you would steep a tea. Okay. And you understand, everybody understands steeping, I trust. That, you know, and you know, you're not bored again. What are you doing? Preparing it just under boiling temperature, pouring it on the substance, for example, the herb. Sometimes they say it, leave it open. Other times you're covering it and allowing it to steep, giving that it time for that heat to work on that, and that water to work on that herb to extract it out, and then you drink it. Okay. That is a temporary extract. By definition, it's also called a temporary extract, which means that after you're not using it for days and days. You're not doing what a lot of people who are out here mistakenly doing is saying, oh, okay, I just make a big pitcher of tea and I just drink off that all week. That's not the way teas are intended to be used, and they do lose their potency, uh, you know, for after sitting around. Okay, so that is that's the least stable, that's the least strong, and that's the least stable form of herbal usage. A decoction, a little bit longer. So you're talking about just keeping teas around for hours at best before discarding. Okay. Again, so you're making smaller amounts, you're making it as needed. Now, there's some people who are going to say, oh, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. Guess what? Take some time. If somebody's got a serious condition, and again, if it's just for recreational purposes, you just want to have some green tea, you want to have a little tea before you go to bed just to kind of warm your up or something like that. You know, it doesn't matter much. I say just avoid that microwave. Okay. Now, but if someone is ill and you're trying to get a therapeutic benefit, make it periodically. Fortunately, I know, I think it happened with my sisters at the time too, but I know that my mother was at home with us for at times, and if she was home with us and we were ill, then she prepared the hot toddy, she prepared the teas, and she did that throughout the day. And she didn't just try to make a big pot and then just say, go, okay, I'm going to keep on heating this up and then pouring from it. She made it fresh. Fresh in that case is best. Again, decoctions, it can last a bit longer. And then the fluid extracts, you're having drops of that. Now, a fluid extract, and again, I'm using this as an illustration, is something that can literally last for years. Alcohol, you don't see expiration dates on bottles of alcohol. You will see manufacture dates or expiration dates on herbal preparations. Okay. And I think that's sometimes it's somewhat arbitrary, but depending on the conditions that they're stored in general, plants in in a state of nature in the home they'll lose their potency over time. The extracts not as much. Okay, I'm going to move on from there though. And go to the next one, mullein, the lung and windpipe healer. So when you think of mullein, think the respiratory system. And I've got another kind of memory hook to remember this. I say there's two L's in the middle of that, and that's lung. We got a right lung and we got a left lung, lung. Okay. So if ever it comes up, you say, okay, name an herb that's good for the lungs or for the respiratory system. You say, okay, what's that LL word? Okay, mullein, lung and windpipe. Okay, and yeah. Okay, okay. Verbascum thapsus is its botanical name. And so in one stage, it's here as it's presented on the ground there. There's another herb called lamb's ear that is similar to this, but it's soft. It's got like almost like a fuzz on it. That's in one of the stages. It is found in the western part of the United States, but you'll also find it here in Michigan and other places. We're using the leaves, the flowers, and the roots of the mullein plant or the mullein herb. Is collected July and August. And again, there are a couple of different stages, like the stage that you see here, where it's from the ground up and you see the yellow flowers and such on it. That's a second year mullein plant. Okay. So when it starts off, it's going to be kind of low to the ground, and then it's going to sprout up in the second year. Call it biennial. Let's see. So mullein dock, blanket herb, shepherd's staff, Adam's flannel benefits dysuria or painful urination, cystitis, amenorrhea. Um, that's when the menses ceases, mastitis, problems with the breast, bronchitis, asthma, uh, even ringworm, and it acts as a bactericide, which is kind of a medicinal property as well. It's a demulcent, an emollient, astringent, an anodyne, pain reliever, slightly sedative. And so what I'm gonna go into more detail in terms of the medicinal properties and give you the glossary and everything, so that it becomes more second nature, or when you see it, you're saying, okay, you understand more of the properties. So yes, it is beneficial for the respiratory system, a long-standing reputation for the respiratory system, but it also helps in other ways, like astringent. That's a different problem. That's part of its action, or in pain reliever as well. Okay, that's mullein, and then we've got the medicinal uses. So categorically for different areas, it shares here whether it's more whether you can use it and how you would use it as an infusion, as a decoction, or as a powder. Now let me kind of tie some things together, because in the previous slide, it said we can use the leaves, the flowers, or the root. Okay. So the if we're using the leaves or flowers, in fact, just kind of put a pin on this because we're going to go to the break, and then I'll probably do a Q&A after the break. And so I'm going to ask you about what part of the plant that you would use for the different preparations. So, for example, we're talking about the mullein, and it said you can use it as an infusion, decoction, or powdering. What part of the plant that you're using? So we'll have a discussion on that. Okay, application and what part of the plant goes with what preparation methods. And then mullein, medicinal use for earaches. So here's another one that would be beneficial for earache, mumps, and is a bactericide. Now this is a special preparation, oil of mullein. Okay, and I say special preparation. I haven't been finding this at health food stores. And incidentally, there are a lot of preparations that they used to have, and they used to have a certain specialty, pharmacies, drugstores, or there was a store, and I don't know if they around. It was like Paul's Cut Rate, where they had certain stores that carried products that people from the South and people of certain cultures would typically get that you wouldn't find everywhere. Okay. So I understand there's a very good preparation. There's a very good recipe. And oil of mullein, you'd remove the flowers from the stem, place in a small container of olive oil, and then soak. And if you see the word macerate, okay, it just means soak. Soak it and macerate for 3 weeks in, guess what? Warm sunlight. Okay. And then, or near a warm stove. We're not cooking it. We're not exposing it to high heat. When you have this flour in the oil, and then you sit it in, for example, a window, the heat from the sun is drawing the benefits out. It's like some of you may have made what they call like sun tea, where you have a clear container. It should be glass instead of plastic, and you put an herb in there, and it's in water, and you just put it up there. So you're not boiling it. You're not preparing it just under boiling. You're preparing the tea using the sun. Now, there are some who will say it's the properties of the sun, the benefits of the sun that's, making it even more beneficial as a healing agent. Okay. So remove flour from the stem, place it. Okay, yeah, you place it in a tightly corked or it doesn't have to be corked, but a clear glass jar. You know what? There's a couple different versions of this as well. So one, you just putting in olive oil and 3 weeks in the warm sunlight. There's another that says put it in a this may be a larger, tightly corked, clear glass jar. Hang the bottle in the sun for 4 weeks, and then the oil from the flower will have been, you call that installation or instilled. Distillation takes things out, installation brings things in. So the oil from the flower comes out in the oil, and you add 10% alcohol to the mix. Okay, so you got a couple of different variations on that, and place 2 or 3 drops in an aching or purulent infected ear. A respiratory combination. So here's a respiratory combination: equal parts of mullein and lobelia, and this is known, is to aid bronchitis and asthma, or it can be used as a standard infusion. If they say standard infusion, standard recipe, or something like that, it's just, that's the common way of doing it. Nothing special adds that, but equal parts. So again, if it's an ounce of mullein, an ounce of lobelia. Now lobelia, and here's a tip on how to remember that and remember what it's for as well. We have two lobes of the lungs. So they say we have two lungs, but let's say we have two lobes of the lungs. So lobelia is for the lungs or the respiratory system. Mullein with those two L's, left lung and right lung. Both of these are for the respiratory system. Okay. And notice they didn't have 16 different herbs on there, right? They didn't say, oh, we're going to put in this and this and that and that. Sometimes simpler is better and less is more. Okay. Now, then we have garlic, also known as the bad germ fighter. Allium sativum is the Latin or botanical name found all over the United States. Parts are used that are the flower stems and the bulb. Most often, you probably have used the bulb and are familiar with the bulbs in the garlic cloves of the garlic. But you can also use the stems. You can use the flower of the garlic. All parts of that plant is beneficial. It's collected in the fall. It's planted in the fall and goes over winter, and you're normally harvesting that in September and October. Benefits: infections, suppurations. It's antibacterial. It's antiseptic. It's also antispasmodic, a diaphoretic, producing sweating, and expectorant to get clear mucus, clear out of the lungs, out of the body. And you can use it as an ointment, an oil, plant juice, or syrup. So there's some special uses for that. Okay. I know we're time, but I'm gonna come to a close on this and completion on this. Garlic medicinal uses in preparation for infections and suppurations. Um, Ointment, express the juice from 3 or 4 bulbs. So as you've been preparing garlic in your dishes and food and those type of things, you can also express the juice. You can get a garlic press. You can put it in a juicer. You can mix the juice with 1 pound of, now this says lard. Again, that's the traditional recipe. That's not my note. Okay. Anybody knows me knows I'm not using the pork or the lard. So there's some other things you can do, but the original recipe called for lard. Rub that on the chest and throw as needed. They say, or mix with Vaseline. I don't tend to use petroleum products either, but the idea is that you're putting it into a substance, an oil or something that will stay and soak into the chest, okay, or the throat, and something that's going to hold it on there. So there are some others and some substitutions that will be in another section that we'll discuss more on equivalents, okay, that aren't going to break anybody's religion or preference or your plant base or whatever. Okay. So for rheumatic pains, for pains of the joints, for example, oil of garlic special prep, grate and bruise the garlic cloves, place to depth of 1.5 inch quart container of jar, cover with pure olive oil. So you see the use of the olive oil, and olive oil is cold pressed. Olive oil with the with some of these with the oil mixtures, really. That's primarily what they use. Not that you can't use some other oils. This recipe calls for olive oil. Place it in the sun or a warm place for 3 days, and then strain the bottle, store in cool place. Dosage use as needed. And again, some of these things were a little labor intensive, or it takes more time. In a society when we want things fast, quick, and in a hurry, we don't want to do that. We want to go to the drugstore and get something. And I need relief right now. Well, guess what? They prepare some of these things ahead of time and then preserve them so that they had them when they needed, because colds and flus and pains and aching and from the temperature or aging or whatever, or injury. Those are common. So some things we want to have in our herbal medicinal chest, we want to have around all the time. So when you need it, okay. So the medicinal uses: whooping cough, bronchitis, plant juice. And again, you probably have never heard of a garlic plant juice recipe. So mix 1 part of the expressed juice with 2 parts of distilled water. And distilled water has different properties than the spring water. We can discuss that another time. Apply the mixture with cotton swab to an infected sore or wound. Okay. So if there's something that's open and you want to deal with that, again, this is nature's antibiotic. They use it in service in war and in wartime, and I think World War II and such extensively before they had all these these chemically based antibiotics. And then medicinal uses for asthma, cough, bronchitis, strep throat. That's respiratory. Syrup of the garlic juice, special preparation. In here, 1 quart of boiling water on 1 pound of sliced garlic bulbs. Steep it for 12 hours. So this is a kind of a long preparation process. Add sugar or honey to make consistency of a syrup, and that's your preference, your bias on that. Bruised and boiled caraway and sweet fennel seeds in vinegar will mask the unpleasant smell of garlic. So sometimes people are, okay, my breath is going to smell bad, or this is going to smell whatever. So there are ways to address that. Use it for coughs and asthma as needed. This would have been one of the original cough syrups. Okay. And then let's see. Red clover. Okay, I'm gonna cover red clover and then we're gonna pause. Red clover, the blood purifier, Trifolium pratense, found all over the United States. The blossom is what we collect. Made of in just the blossom, the root and leaves and whatnot are generally not used. Collected May through August. So we'll be seeing those come up soon in Michigan. Mental stress, purifying the blood, and whooping cough. So there are a lot of people use things like chamomile. They have their, green tea or something they like to use. Not a lot of people are using red clover, and it's really beneficial. So stop poisoning your lawns. And if you want to collect that, collecting in the fields where it hasn't been sprayed would be a good idea. But this red clover is really important. Red clover tends to come up abundantly and is very beneficial. So, infusion. You can use it as an infusion or tea. So you can make a syrup out of it. It's antispasmodic, stops spasm, demulcent, sedative, anti-ulcerative, and an alterative. And we'll get into some more terminology because I know you have questions about that as well. But red clover is really good. Incidentally, it's common in some formulas for, and traditionally has been used for certain forms of cancer. Medicinal uses relieve mental stress, purifies the blood. So again, it is an infusion or a syrup. And that pretty much covers it. Disclaimer: this presentation is for informational purposes only. Does not replace the advice or counsel of a doctor or healthcare professional. Wholistic Training Institute makes every effort to provide information that's accurate and timely, yet we make no guarantee in this regard. We encourage you to consult with and rely on the advice of your physician or personal healthcare physician. I'm not acting as your medical doctor, your primary caregiver, or anything like that, and neither are you. Okay.